polished marble floors of the Stork Club glistened under the chandelier light on the night of February 18, 1946. In the exclusive VIP room, shrouded in a blue haze of expensive cigar smoke, sat the most powerful criminal mind in America. Charles "Lucky" Luciano, freshly released from a prison sentence commuted for wartime service, was a king holding court before his exile. He was surrounded by his royal council, the calm, political Frank Costello, the lethal, brooding Albert Anastasia, the financial wizard Meyer Lansky. Their collective power could bend city government, cripple unions, and end lives with a nod. Yet the map of their dominion had a conspicuous, lucrative blank spot: Harlem. And the man who ruled that territory was 15 minutes late. The tension was not in shouted threats, but in the quiet scrape of a Zippo lighter, the slow clink of ice in a glass of imported scotch. Luciano's men, a hand-picked collection of the hardest killers in New York, stood like statues along the velvet-draped walls, their eyes fixed on the door. They were awaiting a man who, by their rigid code, had no right to be in such a room. He was not Italian. He was not made. He was, in their world, an outsider. But Luciano, ever the pragmatist, new titles were meaningless next to power. And the man walking through that door held power over a kingdom of numbers, dreams, and cash that flowed through the heart of Black America. When Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson finally entered, he did so not with apology, but with the deliberate, unhurried pace of a man entering his own office. The contrast was stark. Where Luciano's crew embodied European-tailored menace, Bumpy was a vision of Harlem's own aristocracy. His suit, a deep navy three-piece, was cut from English wool, hugging his athletic frame without a wrinkle. A crisp white pocket square peeked out, and a gold watch chain draped from his vest pocket. He wore no tie, a signature defiance, a silent statement that his authority needed no uniform. In his right hand, he carried not a weapon, but a simple leather briefcase. The reaction was instant, visceral. The bodyguards' hands twitched toward the bulges beneath their jackets, a symphony of impending violence waiting for its conductor's cue. Luciano did not give it. With a subtle, almost imperceptible raise of his index finger, he froze them. His eyes, cold and calculating, were locked on Bumpy. This was the test, and the first move had already been made. Bumpy had not been searched. He had walked past the most dangerous men in the city unchallenged. It was a calculated gesture of either immense trust or supreme confidence. Luciano was betting on the latter. Bumpy's eyes swept the room, acknowledging no one, yet missing nothing. He walked past the assembled mobsters as if they were furniture, and without breaking stride pulled out the chair at the literal head of the oak table, the seat reserved for the host, for Luciano himself. He sat. He placed his briefcase squarely before him. Only then did he reach into his inner pocket, withdraw a cigar, and light it, the flare of the match illuminating a face of utter, unshakable calm. Frank Costello's jaw tightened. Albert Anastasia's thumb flicked against his fingernail, a telltale sign of homicidal irritation. Meyer Lansky merely watched, a faint, intrigued spark in his intellectual eyes. The insult was breathtaking. In their world, this was a death sentence, but Luciano, to their shock, smiled. It was a thin, appreciative smile. He understood. Bumpy wasn't just being disrespectful, he was establishing the paradigm. He was declaring that this was not a vassal coming to pay tribute, but one sovereign power treating with another. Luciano took the seat directly opposite, ceding the head of the table, and in doing so, acknowledged the terms. "Mr. Johnson," Luciano began, his voice a raspy baritone smoothed by years of command. "Thank you for coming. I know your time is valuable." Bumpy took a long, slow pull on his cigar, letting the smoke curl toward the ceiling before responding. His voice was deeper, quieter, a rumble that demanded you lean in to hear. "You asked for a conversation, Mr. Luciano, so let's converse. The clock is already ticking on your stay in our country." A flicker of surprise, quickly masked. Luciano had expected posturing, perhaps fear, but not this sharp, immediate reference to his weakest point, his impending deportation. The man had done his homework. "Straight to it, I appreciate that," Luciano nodded, folding his hands on the table. "The war is over, the country is changing, my organization seeks stability, a peaceful, prosperous New York is good for business. We have arrangements across the boroughs with the unions, the docks, the police, but there is one piece of the puzzle that remains independent. Harlem, your numbers operation is a masterpiece. It moves millions. My associates believe it is an asset that should be part of a larger, more protected enterprise. He paused, letting the euphemism hang in the air. Associates believe meant I have decided. Mori protected meant controlled by us. I'm not here to wage war, Luciano continued, his tone reasonable, almost paternal. War is bad for business. Dutch Schultz learned that the hard way. God rest his troubled soul. I am here to offer an alliance, a partnership. You continue to run your operations day to day. You keep your men, your collectors, your rhythm. In return, we offer capital for expansion, guaranteed protection from police interference. We have judges and district attorneys on the payroll who can make problems disappear, and insulation from any other external pressures. For these services, we take a modest 40% of the gross. You remain the face of Harlem's numbers. We simply become your silent, powerful partners. The offer was delivered with the slick finality of a boardroom takeover. It was a velvet-gloved annexation. 40% was not a partnership. It was a controlling interest. The room waited. Costello leaned forward. Anastasia's eyes bored into Bumpy, a silent promise of what a no would entail. Lansky's fingers steepled, already calculating the potential revenue stream. Bumpy did not move for a full 30 seconds. He simply smoked his cigar, his eyes never leaving Luciano's. He was breaking another cardinal rule. He was making the most powerful man in the room wait. Finally he spoke, his words dropping into the silence like stones. An interesting proposal. Let me ask you a question, Mr. Luciano. What happens to a partnership when one partner decides he no longer needs the other, when your protection starts to feel like occupation, when your capital comes with strings that start to tighten around the throat of my community? What do I tell the woman on 125th Street who saves her laundry money all week to play her dream, when your soldiers, men who have never stepped foot in her church or known her children's names, come to collect her hope? He set his cigar down precisely in the crystal ashtray. So, let me offer a counter-question. What happens if I decline your generous offer? The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Anastasia's hand slid slowly to his waistband. Luciano's pleasant facade remained, but his eyes, those famously cold blue eyes, hardened into chips of glacial ice. The charm evaporated, replaced by the naked, brutal truth of his power. Then, Mr. Johnson, Luciano said, his voice now soft and utterly dangerous, you would be positioning yourself outside of our understanding. You would become an independent variable in a solved equation. And in our business, independent variables are not tolerated. They are eliminated. It is not personal. It is geometric. If you are not beneath our umbrella, you are standing in our reign, and we control the storm. The threat was absolute. It was the voice of the commission, of the 5 families, of a system that had crushed men far more connected than a black numbers boss from Harlem. Bumpy Johnson nodded slowly, as if Luciano had merely confirmed his suspicions. He reached down and flipped the brass latches on his briefcase. The sound was shockingly loud. Every man in the room, including Luciano, tensed. Was it a weapon, a bomb, out here in this public place? It was an unthinkable breach of their insulated world of private hits and remote dumping grounds. But Bumpy withdrew only a manila folder. From it, he slid a single, glossy black and white photograph across the polished wood, turning it to face Luciano. Luciano looked down. For the first time that evening, his mask of total control cracked. It was a microscopic flinch, a slight tightening at the corner of his mouth, but in that room, it was as loud as a scream. The photograph showed Albert Anastasia, Luciano's own chief executioner, standing in broad daylight on a dock in Red Hook, Brooklyn. He was shaking hands with a uniformed police captain, a man known for his very public, very loud anti-corruption crusades. In the background, clear as day, was the warehouse door of a high-stakes dice game Anastasia owned. That was taken 72 hours ago, Bumpy said, his voice still that calm, low rumble. I have 11 more photographs in this folder. They show meetings between your associates and city officials, payoffs being made at dockyards, evidence being planted by your detective friends. I have names, dates, ledger entries that connect City Hall to your pocket. He leaned forward now, his own eyes locking onto Luciano's. You spoke of mailing things to the press or the DA. I did not. That was my demonstration of respect. You came here tonight to show me your power, your men, your reputation, your umbrella. I am showing you mine. My power is not in the gun, Mr. Luciano. My power is in the photograph. My power is in the secret that becomes a headline. You can send Anastasia to my home tonight. But by morning, this photograph is on the desk of every newspaper editor from here to Washington, and the district attorney you own will be in handcuffs, and the political protection you spent 30 years building will burn to the ground. You will win Harlem and lose New York. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the ragged, furious breath hissing through Anastasia's nostrils. The enforcer was a coiled spring, his face mottled with rage. You little, he began to snarl, half rising. Sit down, Albert, Luciano said, his voice a whip crack. He never took his eyes off Bumpy. He was seeing him for the first time, not as a Harlem curiosity, but as a peer, a strategist, a man who played the game on a board Luciano hadn't even seen. Luciano picked up the photograph, studied it, and then slid it back. So, this is a stalemate. No, Bumpy corrected gently. This is the foundation for a real partnership, one built not on threats, but on mutual interest. You want a share of Harlem's revenue? I will give it to you, but not 40%, 10. A scoff came from Costello. 10, that's an insult. 10% of the net profit, Bumpy continued, undeterred. As a fee for specific, valuable services, you will provide banking, clean, legitimate fronts to launder the large payouts when a heavy number hits. We cannot have $10,000 in cash moving through our streets. You will provide legal defense for my runners when they are arrested in your boroughs. Your lawyers are the best. And in return, you get your 10%, delivered to a courier of your choosing, by my hand, on the 1st of every month. He paused, letting the numbers sink in for Lansky, the logistician. Then he delivered his final, non-negotiable term, his voice dropping to a tone of iron finality. And your people, your soldiers, your collectors, your enforcers, they never come to Harlem. Not to visit, not to vacation, not to pass through. You want your money, you send a blind, unarmed messenger to my office. But your shadow does not fall on my streets. Your guns do not echo in my neighborhoods. Harlem is not a territory to be occupied. It is my home, and it stays under my rule. The audacity was breathtaking. He was not just negotiating a percentage. He was dictating the sovereignty of his domain to the syndicate. He was drawing a border they could not cross. For a long moment, Luciano said nothing. He looked at Lansky. The little accountant gave an almost imperceptible nod. It's clean. It's profit with zero risk. It's genius. He looked at Costello, who gave a slow, reluctant shrug of acceptance. He looked at Anastasia, who merely glared, humiliated but checkmated. Then Luciano did something no one in that room had ever seen. He laughed. It started as a low chuckle and grew into a full, genuine laugh that shook his shoulders. He wasn't laughing at Bumpy. He was laughing at the sheer, beautiful brilliance of the play. Schultz, Luciano finally managed, wiping a tear from his eye. That pig-headed moron. He tried to take from you with a Thompson gun. All he had to do was ask. All he had to do was talk. He shook his head in wonder. 10%, banking and legal, no soldiers in Harlem, monthly delivery. He stood up, a king conceding to an equal. He extended his hand across the table. Bumpy Johnson stood and took it. The grip was firm, dry, and lasted exactly 3 seconds, the handshake of men who understood the weight of the pact they had just sealed. We have an agreement, Bumpy said. 3 weeks later, Lucky Luciano boarded the asterisk SS Laura Keene bound for Naples, never to legally return to the United States. But the deal he made in the Stork Club held firm for 22 years. It survived Bumpy's imprisonment in Alcatraz, during which Frank Costello, honoring the strategic alliance, ensured Bumpy's wife Mame wanted for nothing. It survived police crackdowns and political upheavals. The 10% flowed like clockwork, and the Mafia's financial machinery laundered Harlem's dreams with Swiss precision. That meeting became the stuff of legend, whispered about in social clubs and prison yards. It proved something revolutionary in the brutal, paranoid world of organized crime, that the highest form of power is not the power to destroy, but the power to make destruction mutually undesirable. That true authority stems from leverage, not just fear, from intellect, not just force. Bumpy Johnson didn't have an army to match Luciano's. He had something better, a secret, and the strategic wisdom to use it as a shield, not just a sword. He had looked into the eye of the dragon, and by understanding its nature, had taught it to respect his fence.